This is Renee Romeo of reneeromeo.com. Today's project is learning how to reupholster a bar stool. Now in front of me I have the before and behind me I have the after. So I'm going for a totally different look, brightening everything up. When I purchased the bar stool to begin with, I never really liked the fabric. It's actually vinyl, which really isn't great for anyone that lives with pets. So there are some scratch marks on it and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that. Now you can see it's really a beginner project because there are only 5 pieces of fabric for you to cut and sew together. And I'll show you exactly how to do it step by step. So stay tuned to the end and you can see the before and after in this space. I have the bar stool flipped over to expose the bottom. Now you'll see there are only 4 holes here with screws that I need to remove in order to get the seat to come off. And what I'm using a drill bit here, and the drill bit is really long and it can fit inside this drilled out channel. And so all I'm going to do is make sure I have it in reverse and go ahead and remove every one of these screws. Now the legs simply lift off and we're just going to remove this, and that exposes the bottom. So this piece of fabric that's all over the bottom is called cambric, and this is going to be removed. It's only stapled in place and we're going to reuse it. So let's try not to rip it as we take it off. We'll just very gently remove it. And the tool that I'm going to use for this, now this tool I've used a lot for reupholstery. It's actually a tack remover, but I love it for staples too. So that's what I use to remove staples. And basically all you do is you get underneath the staple with one side and just pry it up and out of place. Now that the cambric is removed, I'm always interested to see what the infrastructure of any piece of furniture looks like once you take the upholstery off. And this one is really a quality piece. It's got some nice thick foam followed by elastic banding, and then of course the spring system, which really makes it nice and cushy feeling when you sit on it. So this is really a quality piece. It's something that is definitely a candidate for reupholstery. Now I wanted to give you a close-up on how to remove staples. So you'll see I'm getting one tip of that tool underneath the staple and prying it up. Now sometimes they come out whole, other times you're going to need a pair of pliers. In my case it's needle nose pliers to pull the rest of that staple out. Now a lot of these staples these days are made out of thin wire, and this is what happens when you pull them out. So don't get frustrated. It's just a little bit extra that you need to put in it to get all your staples out. Sometimes they break, and you're just going to get in there and remove it with your pair of pliers. Now I need to pull the cover off. So all I'm going to do is just gently coax this off the frame. You do the exact same thing. And so what this exposes is the seat itself, which is in perfect condition. So we're just going to set this aside until the cover is completely redone. So when we look inside the inside portion of the seat cushion, we'll see exactly how it's all sewn together. So there are a couple different stitches that go around the top perimeter, and then there's one little stitch in each corner. So it's basically straight stitching for the most part. And how am I going to take this apart to make patterns? So I have a tool called a seam ripper, and this seam ripper, it's shaped kind of like a little lobster claw. Basically one tip is really sharp and the other tip has a little ball on it so you don't hurt yourself as you're kind of going along and moving along removing the stitching. So all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to start looking at the stitching itself and getting in here and just making a little test strip. Now, depending on what fabric you're taking off of your existing stool, you could take your seam ripper and kind of run it along this edge here and get this to come off. But you know, one of the problems with having vinyl is that the vinyl tears very easily, and you can kind of see I've got a little tear in here as a result of trying to move it through the fabric that way. I wouldn't recommend it for vinyl, but if you've got a velvet or some kind of suede or heavy duty upholstery fabric, chances are you could just run it right along that seam and remove all the stitching that you need to. Now the way I'm doing mine, I'm just taking the seam ripper and literally grabbing 1 or 2 stitches at a time and just pulling it apart. Now I know it's a little bit time consuming, but you're only making one set of pattern pieces, so you only have to do this on one bar stool. And the rest of them you can just pull off and discard, but this one you need to be a little extra careful with. I have all 5 of my pattern pieces ready to go, and the one thing that I'm doing at this point is I'm taking a tape measure and I'm double checking the length of these perimeter pieces, these 4 perimeter pieces. Now you'd think that they would be all exactly the same, but you know what? They're all slightly different in length. And so I need to be very aware of that. And so as a result of that, I'm not just taking one of these and making 4 to go all the way around the perimeter. I'm making sure that I'm using all 4 of these to make pattern pieces out of, to make sure that I get the exact same size that's going to fit the entire top of the cushion. I've purchased my upholstery fabric, and mine happens to be 56 inches wide. Now you can get upholstery fabric anywhere from 45 to 60 inches wide, so just be aware of how many seat cushions you can get out of that and how many side pieces you can get out of that. So in my case, this is how I'm laying mine out on the fabric as it's rolled out. So I can get my 6 seat cushions out of this, and then all of my side panels come out of the center and then one side. So that's how I'm laying mine out, and you can lay yours out the exact same way, or if you've got a different configuration, just make sure that you're paying attention to the width measurement of your new upholstery fabric. I've chosen velvet as a replacement fabric, and so there's just one little consideration that you have to take into account when you lay out your pattern pieces. You have to be aware of nap. Now nap is simply the fact that you run your hand over the top of it, and if you run it in one direction or the other, it's going to change color on you. The fibers kind of stick up, and you need to be aware when you lay out your pattern pieces that you're laying everything in the exact same direction. Now, why do you do that? Because if you lay everything out in the same direction, as you look at the piece when it's done, it's all going to be the same color. As you run your hand over it in one direction or the other, it's all going to feel exactly the same from one side to the other. So just to be aware of that, how I deal with it is I'll take a pattern piece, I'll grab a pin, and I'll make sure that I have a pin in the top, what I'm calling the top of the pattern piece. It's always going to be on the top as I lay it out across the entire width of the fabric. So mine is here, and all I'm doing here now is, you can kind of see this is kind of flopsy-mopsy, so you really do need, when you lay this out on your piece, you need to kind of pull it nice and taut as you go across to make sure that you're going to get the exact width measurement all across the piece. Now if you don't do that, you're going to have the wrong size. Now with the side pieces, it's the exact same way. So you're going to denote what the top is here, and you're going to put a pin in it, and then you're just going to take this and really spread it out well, pin it in place so that you get the exact measurement that you need on your new fabric, and go ahead and cut those out. The fabric for the seat is all cut out, and I have 4 individual pieces to make that band that goes around the cushion. So you can see at this point that all of my pattern pieces, I've also made sure that I have a pin in the top of them so I don't confuse anything and sew this together improperly. So all I'm going to do is take these pieces of fabric, and they're going to be sandwiched right sides together. And you always sew on the back side of the fabric anytime that you're doing any project like this. And you can kind of see, I'm just going to pin it in place very quickly. My 4 pieces are all pinned together, and I'm just coming back here, just lining this up, making sure that I have everything in place. And really the most important part of lining this up is making sure that the top edge lines up perfectly. If you don't do that, you might have issues when you sew this together. So just make sure that you're aware that that top edge is really the most important part of getting all of this lined up correctly. I've stuck a piece of masking tape down on the deck of my sewing machine, and this is going to give me the width of my seam allowance that I need for all the way along the perimeter of that cushion. And so that seam allowance is basically just the distance between the needle and the edge of the fabric, and all I need to do is just line the edge of the fabric up with that piece of tape and push it through the machine. Now whether it's the beginning or the end of any piece of stitching that you do, you're going to secure this in place by running the machine backwards. So you see what I mean. That gives a nice secure finish to any of your stitching. The perimeter of the chair is all sewn together and all of the edges along the top line up perfectly, so I'm in really good shape for this. So at this point what I need to do is I need to locate the center of each and every individual piece. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold it. So I've got my two seams completely lined up together, and there's the center piece of one piece, and I'm just going to mark it on the back side with a pencil. So I have all four sides done, and I'm just going to go ahead and take my top piece, which is my seat, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to fold it onto itself to find the very center of all four sides. Everything is lined up, and so this is folded in half like so, and I'm just going to put a mark here and then a mark here on the other side. In order to sew this together properly, we put right sides together. So this is going to go face side down on top of this piece here. So these two pieces are being sandwiched together, and I'm going to line up the two marks that I just made. All of the centers are lined up together and pinned in place. The next thing I need to do is locate the corner. So all I'm going to do here, I'll take the two pins and put them together, get my very corner on this seat side, and mark that with a pencil as well. Now with this mark in place, I can take this curved area and I can just place it right on top of that seam in the corner, like so. And I'll pin that in place. Now this is where upholstery gets a little bit complicated, and you'll see these two pieces of fabric don't line up completely perfectly. But what you need to do here is you need to rely on pins, and you need to rely on actually pulling the fabric into place and making sure that everything is going to line up when it's pulled. Now in the stitching process, you're going to take care of all of this extra fabric that's on the seat area, so don't be concerned about it at this point. Just go ahead and line this up as best you can at this point, and we're just going to pin it in place. Now you're going to continue to pull this as you go, making sure that you're going to get this nicely laid out all along the perimeter. And here's what it looks like when it's all pinned together. Now you'll see I'm stitching this with the banding facing toward me. I don't want to put the seat facing toward me because I'm not going to have as much control when I get to a corner and see kind of what's going on. I want to avoid any pitfalls that might occur at any corner. So I'm starting somewhere in the center here, and I'm just going to lower my presser foot. I have my masking tape still in place, making sure that that seam allowance is going to be consistent all across the entire length of the stitch line. Now as I stitch this, I want you to be aware that all you're concerned about is the space in between these two pins. Don't think of anything going on further down the line, because it's going to make you question what you're doing. So you're just going to remove your pins, and this is kind of a slow process here, but all I'm doing between the needle and the actual pin is kind of pulling this and holding this nice and taut in place, and then just letting it kind of feed through the machine itself. And I'm going to continue on like that until I get to the corner. So I'm coming up to my first corner, and I'd like to be able to actually sew this seam flat down. So I'm just going to pull on this seam backwards, lay it nice and flat, and then really all I'm doing here is coaxing a little bit. So I'll remove the pin, and I'll just go ahead and stitch. And then I can go ahead and remove the other pin and stitch, making sure that I'm keeping this raw edge at that piece of tape so that my seam allowance is right. I can remove my other pin and pull on that fabric, and it's going to lay nice and flat. And I'm about to come back to the start of the stitching, and you'll see this is lining up just perfectly. I remove the last pin, and right back in there. Wow. So you'll see it follows the curve perfectly. There's no puckering, no extra fabric. I think that's really the worry with going around corners like this is, you know, the puckering that might occur if you're not going slow and you're not kind of coaxing the fabric in place. So just go slow and you'll have corners just like mine. Now the original stool had top stitching a 1/4 inch away from the seam all the way around the perimeter of the seat. I'm going to put that back in. I think it looks really nice. So I'm just going to go ahead and line it up with the edge of my presser foot here, just as a guideline. So I'm going to lower that and go ahead and start stitching in place. Now this is what the top stitching looks like. It's a 1/4 inch away from the actual stitching that we just did. And when you get to the corner, you need to make a little adjustment. So I'm opening this out, and not on the seat side, but on this perimeter of fabric here. You're just going to take the fabric, pair of scissors, and just clip it just ever so slightly, and you'll see it's maybe 1/8 of an inch down that I'm clipping it, like so. But this is going to give you a little bit of extra maneuverability around that corner to get this to lay nice and flat. And as I go, I'm really pulling away on the fabric to make sure that everything's going to lay nice and flat. Both threads from the beginning of the top stitching, and I've taken them to the back side and tied them off. And I'm just going to come to the front side and make sure that my needle is going to line up perfectly with the very beginning of the top stitching. And it meets up perfectly, so I'll flip it to the back side, pull out that thread, and tie it off. I have the seat cushion again. I'm just going to place this right side up, grab my cover, and put it over the top. Now from that point, I need to make sure that all of my seams at the corners are lined up perfectly with the corner. So this is just for placement, making sure that I get the cover to go back on exactly the same way as I took it off. And they all look perfect. So from this point, I'm stapling the fabric back onto the frame, and I'm using an electric stapler for that, outfitted with 1/2 inch staples. I'm just going to put a staple in the very center of that frame. And I'll pull the fabric nice and tight to the other side and do the exact same thing. Now all 4 centers have staples in them. So what I'm going to do at this point is start from the center out to each corner and staple all 4 sides and then leave the corners for last. And as I staple, I'm making sure that I'm pulling the fabric not only up but away from that center staple so that everything lays out nice and taut. In order to secure this corner, the seam is lined up perfectly with that little corner piece. I'm pulling it nice and tight in this direction, and then I'm going to take my staple gun and I'm going to run the staple parallel to this line. Perfect. So as I come to the corner, this is already stapled in place. My fabric is kind of hanging out here, and I'm just making sure this is going to lay nice and flat. So I'm just taking this and kind of folding it like an envelope, and then I'll place that right in place just like this and staple it. And do the same thing with the other side. And we'll go ahead and place the cambric right back on top, making sure that we're covering up all of the staples that we just put in, and it looks really good. So this doesn't really need all that many staples to get it to hold in place. It's really just laying against the wood anyway. So just put a few in place and we'll be ready to put this right back together. I'm placing this right back on top, and I'm just going to secure the screws back in place and show you what it looks like. Well, here you have it. Everything is nicely fitted back on. It looks perfect. It looks like the piece came this way, and it really probably should have, rather than the vinyl piece that was on there. So I think I've made a huge improvement to this. Anything you have around your house like this, you'll make a huge improvement to as well. If you enjoyed watching this project, please go to my website and subscribe. I'll send you an email notification every time I post. And if you're on Facebook, please like and share as often as possible. And if you have any questions for me, please enter a comment below and I'll be happy to answer any question you have. This is Renee Romeo of reneeromeo.com. Thank you so much for watching. And look what a dramatic difference it makes to the appearance of the bar. It's posh, it's lighter, brighter, more luxurious.